Howdy, and welcome back to my garage. I was about to do a very small upgrade to this Neon, this shark tooth one that you might have seen on a previous video of mine. But I decided I might as well film it. I mean, to a lot of people in the Neon community, this is really nothing. But to somebody who might be getting into it, this could be kind of handy, something good to know. A popular kind of very small upgrade that you can do to first generation Neons to get you, a little more power, maybe, supposedly. I know the throttle is going to be a lot more responsive because I've done it to my other Neons and I do like it, is an automatic throttle body. If you have a manual transmission Neon or one that was born with a manual transmission, the throttle body is actually necked down slightly. In fact, let me grab a manual throttle body to show you, but you know what, I'll show you the automatic one here first. So this one I've already kind of cleaned up and took a look at and whatnot, and it's in pretty decent shape. And if you can kind of see through, she's pretty well straight through. The manual's actually kind of neck down. Let me grab a manual one and I'll show you an example. Now, of course, this one is nice and dirty. I pulled it off of the shelf, but we can kind of see here. Kind of somewhat hard to tell, but it's smaller in the front than it is in the rear. And you can kind of see there's a beveled edge here, and so it necks it down. And my understanding is that basically makes it so that you can shift more smoothly. I guess smoother throttle response in a sense. The spring is also quite a bit tighter. A lot of people do take the time to take these apart, pull the shaft out, and swap the spring. But honestly, I get used to the lighter spring so quickly, it's not really a big deal. So, these are the two throttle bodies side by side here. And like I said, it's probably pretty hard to tell in the video. But there is, I mean, you can kind of see this reflection of the beveled edge. And you kind of see it's not there in this one. It's hard to see. But the other thing that's different on these that you got to pay attention to is, of course, the throttle cable attachment. So, on the automatic transmissions for most of the years, you have a setup like this with this plastic cam, and it uses two cables that have these like molded lead balls on the end. And the automatic one actually has a single lobe. So for the throttle cable itself, that's fine. That's not going to cause an issue. But what can cause an issue is if you have cruise control. So for example, and I'm going to show you on this car, it has cruise control, and it actually uses this other cable slot, which obviously won't work with this because it's only got one. So for me, the easiest way is find another cruise brain out of another Neon or car or something that might have something similar. I'm sure there's other things that would share the same part, but Neons are still relatively easy to find parts for. First generation ones are getting fewer in the junkyard, but there's still quite a few of them. So what I'm going to do is I'll bring you in closer. We'll pull this intake and throttle stuff apart, and then I'll show you that cruise control cable attachment as well, and how easy it is to swap these. I mean, these really are some of the easiest cars in the world to work on. Not the easiest, but pretty damn easy, especially if once you've done a little bit with them, they're kind of a cakewalk. So we'll get you in and we'll take a closer look. So what I'm going to start by doing is I'm going to start by obviously taking off the intake tube. Now if your Neon still has a factory intake tube, it's just the plastic tube that runs up over here, and it comes off the same way. It's just a worm gear style hose clamp, straight blade screwdriver. Really simple to remove. Once you've got it loosened up, just give her a good solid yank. Shouldn't break. Well, at least they never break for me in Minnesota anyways. In this case, my intake is actually, they call it the 3-liter intake. This intake elbow is actually off of a older Chrysler product from the 90s. Any Chrysler car with a 3-liter V6, whether it was the minivans from 1987 to 1994 with a 3-liter V6, Chrysler LeBaron convertibles, Dodge Shadows, some Dodge Daytonas, any Chrysler that had that 3-liter intake, Dodge Dynasties, stuff like that. The nice thing is it actually fits, and it allows me to put the air filter into a more cooler zone of air versus right above the manifold where it's hot and warm. In order to do it, you do have to relocate the battery, though, which I don't mind doing anyways because I just like throwing it in the trunk and it makes life a little easier under here. There's something in here. I don't know what. Guess we'll have to look into that and figure it out. So the next thing that we're going to do, there is a vacuum hose here that leads to the brake booster. You don't have to take it off. You can move it out of the way. For me, I've already removed the clamp, so it's just easy enough to pull it off, and it just gets it out of my way that much more. And so to get the throttle cables off, I'm actually going to open up the throttle by hand and just pull these cables off. If I can, oh good lord, they're stuck. There we go. 1, 2, and I'll probably show a close-up of that in a minute too. So the cables are now disconnected, but the bracket is still attached. And there's two 10mm bolts going into the side that hold this bracket in place. So I'm going to go ahead and pull those off real quick. Alright, there's the second little 10mm metric number 6 bolt. And so now the bracket comes off of here. You can see the two holes for the bolts. And now I'm going to remove these cables from this bracket assembly. If I don't have cruise control, you don't really need to worry about removing these. But because I'm going to be swapping this one out, I kind of have to remove them anyways. And to do that, it's really easy. You just have to squeeze these little tabs in. Sometimes you might need a pliers. In this case, I can do it by hand. And I'm actually just going to remove the one for the cruise, because the throttle one I don't need to remove, so I'll just set that aside. Eventually, I'm going to change the intake entirely on this car to one from a second generation Neon, which actually gives you some horsepower gains as well, because it doesn't have that 90-degree neck right here. But before I do that, I need to get a longer cable from the junkyard for the throttle body. And I don't know on the cruise on that one. I got to figure out the bracketry on that. When I do get that figured out, I'll do a video on that too. So now that these cables are out of the way, I'm just going to pull the rest of the throttle body off. It does have two sensors on it, the idle air control valve and the TPS. TPS is pretty easy to unplug from here, but the idle air control valve you can't really reach. In this case, I'm just going to take the two 13mm bolts out first and then unplug them after I pop that apart. So that is what we'll do next, 13mm socket. Alright, the two 13mm bolts out. Now I can lift the throttle body up, and there it is. And just disconnect the sensors and drop the throttle body, which is fine. You know, it had to go like right behind the tire where it's not the easiest to grab, doesn't it? There we go. Got the throttle body out. You may or may not be able to see that necking that we were talking about there. She's not too greasy, but nobody said this motor was... Well, actually, I don't really know how much oil this motor burns yet. I haven't really driven it around much. The previous motor did consume some oil, so I guess we're going to find out. But at any rate, I do have to take these sensors off and move them to the other throttle body. So let's take care of that real quick. Now these sensors are held in place with a number T20, number 20 Torx bit, which is what you'll have to use to get the throttle position sensor off. The idle air control valve, you can use the same T20 on it, but it also usually does have, most of the time, has a hex head as well, which is an 8mm, which generally I'm going to prefer to use because it's far too easy to strip these little number 20 Torxes. And these are usually in here pretty good. They're full of yellow Loctite, and they can be a real ass. Unfortunately, sometimes they will snap off inside here. So you got to be careful, and it's kind of at your own risk in a sense. Now, I have run throttle bodies plenty of times with only one of the two fasteners in place. Probably not ideal, but I haven't run into an issue with it yet. But it is something that is very possible. So I'm going to get the rest of these, pull these sensors off, and we'll look over the sensors real quick and just kind of see what we're looking at. Alright, so I have the sensors replaced here. You'll want to note that there is actually an O-ring that helps seal up the idle air control valve up against the body of the throttle body. Yeah, if that's not there, you will have a vacuum leak, and you will have inconsistent or high idles as a result. Now, of course, you're using a junkyard throttle body, most likely. You do want to make sure you clean up things ahead of time. This one I've already kind of cleaned up somewhat. The port that the idle air control valve goes into has a cone-shaped receiving end for the cone shape of this throttle body, this idle air control valve. And how it varies your idle speed is by pulling in and out the cone and kind of creating and completing the seal, and that's how it varies how much air it's going to let past. The air actually comes in through a hole that's kind of like right in the side here that you probably can't see, and then it goes past that hole out this hole. So you want to make sure you clean that out. If you have a car that's having erratic idle issues, that's kind of the first thing you can try too, is give this cleaned out. This is a throttle body and not a carburetor, so you can use carbon choke cleaner on it, and you could probably use brake cleaner on it, but you do want to be careful. The reason they make a separate throttle body cleaner versus just the carbon choke cleaner is because some throttle bodies actually have a Teflon coating inside of them, and carbon choke cleaner and brake cleaner will eat right through that Teflon coating, and then you'll have problems with the throttle sticking and stuff. So I do strongly recommend that if you're going to clean a throttle body, get the throttle body cleaner versus the carbon choke. Otherwise, you do run the risk of damaging. These Neons, I honestly don't know if they have any coating like that, but it's a good thing to keep the knowledge of. And also, you just want to make sure that the little groove where the O-ring sits is nice and kind of cleaned out. This one is, I mean, it's not great. Take my screwdriver and just kind of run my screwdriver through it. Good enough for me anyways. I have really low standards if you haven't already noticed. So I'll put the idle air control valve in last, but the first thing I'll do is I'm going to put the TPS sensor in last. Now the TPS sensor is spring loaded. You can kind of feel it with your fingertip. So you got to think about the way the throttle body opens in relation to the little grooves on that sensor. So when I'm pulling like this, that means this little tab, of course, is moving this way, which is the way it springs. So I want to put the throttle body on basically completely cattywampus and then turn it back. And you should feel a little bit of tension on it when you do that. And you can also verify by lining it up to the holes and pull it off. And if it clicks, then you know you were in the right spot. If you put it on wrong, the throttle might jam up on you, or you won't get good throttle response because this sensor needs to be up against this tang for proper response. So I put it on sideways with the connector facing the idle air control valve, and then I turn it till it's straight on, and then put the screws in place. I got those screws in, and I tighten them down, and I just put them on just snug. Now when it comes to attaching the idle air control motor, once you know your surfaces are clean and your O-ring is nice and soft and in place, then you can just slap that on there. And it actually doesn't matter which direction it's facing. In this case, I'm going to put it with the tab facing the TPS because that's the way it was oriented when I pulled it apart. If the tab was facing the other way, it honestly wouldn't hurt anything. And older Neons actually have a different idle air control valve where the tab is actually, the connector kind of goes in this direction. So you don't want to put that on upside down, otherwise your connector is coming from the bottom. Might not be enough wire to quite reach it. But otherwise, the orientation of it, honestly, doesn't matter at all. So same thing, just screw it down and just snug them up just a little bit. Don't go wrenching on it, otherwise you might break the little a bolt in half or pull the threads out of the aluminum body. So I'll just snug this up. Okay, so got the sensors all put in place. Throttle body looks good and clean. Well, cleanish, I guess, right? Here's the old manual one. You can kind of see the edge there that this one doesn't quite have. So, kind of shows you the difference a little bit there. So, of course, we have a soft rubber gasket on these plastic intakes. And if it's still nice and pliable and you can push your fingernail into it and it's nice and soft, you can easily reuse this. Otherwise, new ones are really cheap. They're only a couple of bucks, and you can pretty simply replace it. And like I said prior, because the one connector is kind of a pain in the butt to get at, I'm going to go ahead and plug these connectors in before I put the throttle body back in. That way, it's that much easier. Now, these throttle bodies have a kind of a mounting plate that's bolted to the engine as well, unless if somebody's already removed it. I don't necessarily like removing it because My thoughts are it's kind of there for a reason. It is a plastic intake manifold, and I think the idea is to take the stress off of that. So when I put these bolts in, I'm not going to tighten them up right away. I'm going to make sure that I get the bolts for this bracket started, because they go through this bracket and the throttle body to hold the throttle body cable in place. Once I know that they're started and nothing's jamming up and everything, and I've kind of lightly snugged them down, then I'm going to go ahead and tighten these back down the rest of the way. That way I kind of get it in there as square as possible. But before I can really do that, I do have to tackle this cruise control issue I spoke of. So obviously, my throttle cable is going to attach here just fine, but this cable is not quite going to attach for the cruise. So I'm actually going to swap this cable end with a part from another cruise brain. So in order to do that, we're going to have to quick remove this cruise brain, which is really easy as well. You got just simply a vacuum line, one electrical connector, and these two 10 mils, which just got a little 10 mil deep socket here. And pop these off real quick. Now, of course, you can swap the whole cruise brain assembly if you have one that you know is good, or you can take this cable part off and just swap the cable in. I do actually happen to have a whole cruise brain that I know is good, but I'll show you this anyways, that way you know. So, get the cruise brain out here, and it's got the one plug. Push that stupid little lock in, and there we go. Okay, so what's actually already removed from here, and I was kind of hoping it was here to show you, I do have one sitting right here that I removed from the other cruise brain to show you. The only thing that kind of, you know, this plastic piece is held on when it's mounted in the vehicle. And what they do during the assembly process is they put these little metal washers on. And all you got to do is dig a screwdriver underneath and bust the damn things off. You don't need them. They don't need to be there. It's just to keep this together in an assembly phase so that you don't have to worry about it. So, if you're going to replace just this cable, all you have to do is kind of see there's a little pin there. All you got to do is pull that pin out, and you can easily remove this part. Now, I've got the other one here that I threw a little rejuvenation spray on. And I'll show you how that looks. So here's the new cable, which has this kind of clip that's going to go ahead and grab around that throttle body there. And of course, where it attaches to the cruise module is identical. So the new one, grab that sitting over here. As you can see, I dolled her up with the rejuvenation spray. Not a very good job by any means. The can was pretty well screwed, and didn't want to spray worth a damn, but I just didn't care. I mean, it kind of goes with the whole look. So we just have this little pin here that we can pop out. Hang on one second here. So we can simply take this little guy then and just put him right through there so his little holes line up. And push this little pin in. Like that. So that way now it is attached to the vacuum diaphragm. And then I can put this back on. And really simply I can reinstall it in the car, but I suppose I should take this beautiful blue tape off first. So we'll get this cleaned up and I'll slap this guy back in here real quick. Forgot me remote. Okay. That all snugged up, so I got the new brain in, and that looks a heck of a lot better than the old rusty piece of shit that was in there. And now I can go ahead and get the cable attached here. So see if I can feed it through this hole. Oh, see, that's why I usually have to take the other cable out. This plastic head is a little bit bigger and needs to space in order to get through. So I got to take the throttle cable out, put the cruise cable in first. I knew there was a reason I had to. And then snap that back in. And now I can go ahead and get these little bolts started on this little bracket into here. So we'll get this bolted on. Just get these good and snug. And then double check these two little guys here. I kind of brought them down but didn't quite snug them up. This one's got some shit in the threads, but we just kind of push right through it. Who cares? There we go. Brackets in place. So now I can simply attach the throttle cable same way I did prior. Just kind of hold the throttle open and push that in like so. And then this guy, I can just kind of loop right through here and just kind of give him a bit of a tug, and he locks right in place. There we go. And now, of course, before we test fire this, don't forget to reconnect any vacuum lines you had disconnected. Otherwise, you're going to have one hell of a high idle when you start the engine. Won't hurt nothing. Your engine will just start up screaming like a mad bastard, and you'll wonder why. So, that all appears to be in check. Let's go ahead and fire it up. Contact. Fail. Remote start system. Not enough fuel pressure in the system to quite kick it over right away. It'll try again here. In fact, we'll kick it in the ass. Push the button. Button again. Next prime. There's the prime. Bring the sound up. There we go. Look at that. Very good. I just gotta figure out what's inside that goddamn intake tube. That looks pretty good. Shut her off. She's not idling high or nothing, which is nice. There's something in there. You'd think maybe I could get into the right spot to... Oh my God. That is a cheese and peanut butter sandwich cracker thing. Focus, you fuck. Fucking rodents. You know, this was probably in there for a while, because it's like, how in the fuck could they get this thing in here when I was on the engine? They probably put it in here before I put this back on the engine in the last video. But, wow, you know? What a weird thing to find inside your intake. Doesn't sound like there's anything else in there. Maybe there's a dead mouse. I don't know. It'll be fine. We'll just slap it back on there and call it a day. These things can be a bit tight to put on sometimes. You got to kind of work them around. And usually they're only kind of a real bitch to get on like the very first time. And then after that, they kind of stretch out a little bit, and then they're not so difficult. But yeah, that's the throttle body swap. Really easy. If you do have to replace an idle air control valve or TPS sensor, I mean, as you can see, it really is quite easy as well. You just want to be careful not to break the screws. I did mention, like I said, they've got a lot of that yellow Loctite on them, so they can be tricky. And you could probably warm this up a little bit with a torch too. But, you know, we're talking about a plastic sensor. You don't want to put too much warmth in there, you know, if you're concerned about saving the sensor. Now, if it's a shit sensor, then fuck it. Heat her up and go, because you're tossing the sensor anyways, right? But, yeah. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy. Everything's looking pretty good on this car. She'll be back on the road pretty quick here. It's just got expired registration right now. You know, more pressing matters, I suppose. But, thanks for watching, and I guess join me in the next video. We'll probably be doing some more kind of goofy stuff to this car. I've got some really goofy ideas coming up related to the interior and switches and things, and all sorts of other goofy things and whatnot. So that'll be kind of fun, you know. And other projects will come as we go here, and I mean, even eventually we might get around to. You know, this winter I plan on bringing that 86 laser in the garage and getting some work done on that. That thing hasn't ran in I don't even know how many years. Allegedly has a rebuilt engine in it that's never been started. Good question is the detail on that. So that'll be an interesting project. That'll definitely be a long-term deal for sure. But you know, some other things. I'll do some other little random side stuff as we go here too, and try to do things to occupy myself through the Minnesota winter. But hopefully some of this was helpful and maybe useful. You know, a few simple little bolt-on mods, and you can kind of get these things to breathe a little bit better and give you a little more oomph, which is exactly what I was hoping for with this car. This particular car, you know, at the last video after I destroyed the previous engine, I now have a dual overhead cam block, which has different pistons in the single cam, and I slapped the single cam head on, so that actually bumps up the compression a bit. I also have a Magnum camshaft from a 2001 Neon RT. I have a little pace setter header, not very much, and basically straight exhaust after that. So it's got just a few very little things to it to kind of give it a little kick in the pants. And my first test drive, it felt pretty damn good. So I guess we'll see how this throttle body helps, and maybe eventually when you get the intake on, it might get this thing to breathe pretty good. Who knows, I might even slap a Wuhan war whistle on there at some point, you know, just for the fun of it. But I guess we'll see. But more projects to come. Thanks for watching.